上午场数位典藏，让我们先欢迎主持人国立故宫博物院林国平处长。
首先我们要欢迎这个Tom Scott，从 London。我想 I believe the weather is quite similar with London, right? I'm the weather today. Since you're from London. Really? Okay, sure. 所以一大早呢，算是挺忙碌的啊，交通也忙，人也忙。我也可以告诉各位，我很少来福大，一年大概来个1、2次。但这一次我把福大走遍了。我可以告诉各位，看到医学大楼之后，别再往前走了，后面那条巷子是不通的，所有的门都非常安全的 secured， 绝对进不来的，所以我还必须要绕到前头来。这难得，我相信可能在福大念书的人还不见得有机会走到后面那个巷子去啊。But anyway， 博物馆的数位化、公共化，还有这些议题，实际上已经走了10几年了，绝对不是个新鲜的议题。但是 Tom 今天要谈的这个问题，我自己前2天收到这个资料之后，我很仔细的去看了一下。我想说，已经10几年了，有什么在好谈这个数位典藏呢？不就是拿个数位相机对着文物拍一张照片，有这么难吗？但事实上真的很难。连故宫博物院做了10几年了，常常面对的几个问题，最基本的，到底拍完了没有？没有拍完的那一天。那到底拍够了没有？也没有，因为又有新东西出来了。最近流行3D， 所以立体的拍摄，这个立体影像的结局又来了。那更严重的一个问题是，那到底有用没用？拍了老半天，有多少人用了？用的好不好？找得到找不到？是关键问题。那他们的议题里面 cover 到的，事实上我看最重要的就是最后这一点，因为他谈到了当初他设计这个系统的时候呢，他把图书馆还有整个馆藏跟他的数位影像的管理上头，他去做一个重新的检视、重新的设计，然后从他的出身，从 BBC 一直到几个印刷出版公司。然后他都是在产品研发、系统开发这个领域，我相信他的背景本身就是在资讯这方面有一个专业的素养，所以当他进到这样子一个所谓的医学博物馆的时候，那透过他的系统开发的能量，重新去组织这些问题的时候，得到一个很好的一个结果，就是让所有的使用者能够从他们的角度去寻找到他所要的资料。事实上这件事情，纵使在故宫博物院，我们也是最近才发现这个问题的症结。为什么呢？因为10几年来所做的事情，都是站在博物馆馆员的角度，在拍摄资料、建立 metadata， 同时建立所谓的搜寻的界面。事实上，到目前为止都还不是那么样的一个完善。所以我想，今天的议题，我身为一个主持人，最重要就是撩动各位的 appetite。那待会呢，去享用这一个大餐。那我们欢迎 Tom
Scott。Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. It's a great honour to be here. I thought today it would just be useful to share some of my experiences of trying to make our collections available online and the approach that we're taking. Oh, beg your pardon. Can everyone hear me at the back? So, what's clear in some ways as an outsider to the museum world, but it's also clear over the last few days here, is that we all talk about collections, we talk about digital, we talk about archive. We talk about these on a daily basis, but in truth, we all mean slightly different things by that. And we don't do that to be awkward to each other. We do it because language is this joyfully flexible, imprecise companion that we carry around with us. We are dealing with different problems, we're dealing with different collections. We have different users and we work in different institutions. Leaving aside the sort of different financial and cultural context that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So, the approach that I'm taking to this, I hope has some synergy for the problems that you're facing, but I wouldn't want to presume that I have the answers to this. These are particular problems that I'm experiencing, and I'd like to share the approach that we've had. The particular problem that we are facing is how to make our digital material, our catalogue, as useful to people as possible. How do we help people engage with this information? It isn't about metadata standards, it's not about IT systems. Actually, it's not even really about in-venue digital experiences. It's a simpler problem in some ways. It's about how to make our catalogues and our digital collections useful, impactful, and discoverable. And because I work at Wellcome, we want to do those things so that great ideas can thrive. So this is Wellcome Collection's mission, its purpose. We're a free museum and library. We're based on the Euston Road in London, but exhibitions tour around the world. What we want to do is we want to try to explore the intersections between life, health, and our place in the world. And we do that by seeking to create opportunities for people to think deeply about those connections, about science and medicine, about life and art, by making thought-provoking content that improves people's access to that and improves the diversity of perspectives represented in those collections and through the research that we carry out. Wellcome Collection is part of Wellcome Trust, which is a global biomedical charity whose mission is to try to improve human health by helping great ideas to thrive. We do that in part by funding health-related research and in part by doing things such as the Wellcome Collection, so the museum and library. So Henry Wellcome collected a purported 1 million objects during his lifetime. After his death and the formation of the various incarnations of Wellcome Trust, much of the 3D collection, much of the physical collection, was placed on permanent loan to the Science Museum. Those collections still are used to inspire our exhibitions and events, but the primary collection that we hold on site is our library. And it's those collections that I'd like to focus on today. I say, the collection was started by Henry Wellcome, but we continue to develop that collection. And the library is there to encourage those great ideas about health to thrive by trying to connect science, medicine, life and art. So it's a history of medicine library. Sort of. It's not wrong to say it's a history of medicine library, and certainly that is what most people that come to the library know us for. But that's a quite narrow view of what the library contains, what the information is that we hold within the material, the people and the organisations that we try to represent. Because medical professionals and scientists are people too. And in acquiring their archives, in acquiring their collections, we acquire their life's work, whether that be professional or personal, which is why we hold material like this. So this is Thomas Hodgkins, who was born in, or towards the end of 1798, and died in 1866. He's a pathologist, or was a pathologist, and he was known for the discovery of Hodgkin's lymphoma. So, very clear medical connection. However, he campaigned for many years for the abolition of slavery. He was generally a social reformer. He travelled widely, and he was a Quaker. All of this information is held within this archive, much more than purely the medical information. Likewise, this man, John Dixon. John Dixon died at the ripe old age of 98, and for many years was the medical officer of Bermondsey, which is a part of London, and his job was to record the activities, the medical health of the area, and to be the sort of figurehead for Bermondsey's health. But his collections include writings on language, a huge board game collection, large photographic collection, and writings on cactus. again, not typical maybe of a history, a medical library. More visually, we have pieces of work like this. So the main picture here is a colour etching by Gilray. It's of Edward Jenner, who was the person that first developed vaccinations in 1802. Obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but vaccinations were a revolutionary treatment, of course. But even then, they were seen as an infringement of liberty. And this painting mocks what Jenner was trying to do. And they've got some sort of lovely little touches in here. So at the top here, there's a painting of the Israelites and the fallen and the golden calf, trying to sort of present Jenner as and vaccinations in general as this idea that we're worshipping a false idol. His helper, this boy down here, is dressed in the uniform and wearing badges to identify him as from a workhouse, a poorhouse. In other words, a boy that wasn't properly trained, and that this is all trying to chip away at the respectability of what Jenner was trying to do. This picture down here is an image from a manuscript of the Witches of Scotland from 1658. At the time, there was a lot of persecution of witches, and this is a handwritten register of all of the witches in Scotland at that time. You might ask why. Well, it was a fairly serious issue. There was estimated between 3,000 and 5,000 women, particularly women, although a few men, were publicly accused in Scotland during the 16th and 17th century. You might ask, what on earth is that doing in our collection? Well, the people that were accused of witchcraft were often healers, part of the folk medicine tradition. And their practices often were for good effect, but if they weren't and people were unhappy, then they would often get blamed or accused of witchcraft. We also have contemporary images. This image here from a neonatal ward, the image at the top, a so-called fugitive sheet, so a sort of a 3D layered image to help people understand anatomy. We'll have a look at that later. And the image at the bottom here is from the Scottish photographer, geographer and traveller John Thompson, who lived from 1837 to 1921. And he was one of the first photographers to document his travels around East Asia. Whenever anybody asks why we have a particular item in the collection, why we have that set of material, it's normally down to this man. This is Henry Wellcome. So he was the founder of the drug company and went on to collect a large collection of his own, but then on his death he passed in trust to what became Wellcome Trust. But his attitude to collecting, the way in which he viewed health and science, was an incredibly progressive, rounded view of it. So he wanted to try to capture every aspect from life to death, including charms, magic, contagion, demons, folklore, recipes, sexuality, monsters, writings on the apocalypse. And this then really is the first problem that we have, is that people don't know that. Most people are unaware of the breadth and depth of information and the material that we hold within the library. Because if you don't know what's in there, then you're unlikely to search for it. And at the moment, mostly, we and every other museum, library and archive in the world presents a search interface as the way into that information. Before you can search for something, you need to know the bounds of that collection. You need to know the type of material that you might expect to find. And this lack of understanding, this lack of knowledge, limits not only the usage of our materials, but also the diversity of the users that might want to use those collections. And that's a real problem, because if we want to have great ideas, we need to have lots of people and lots of diverse people having those ideas, because we don't know up front which of the ideas are great and which of the ideas are not so great. So how do we create a rich, diverse community of users able to access the full breadth and depth of our collections? Now, to be fair, we have experimented in the past, so this is a prototype that a colleague at work, Jen Phillips-Backer, put together, where trying to surface give an indication of the breadth of material that we hold, whether those are the people represented, the types of subjects, or the types of material that we hold. Our second problem is that people don't necessarily know what they're searching, which might sound a little odd. The trouble is that Google and other search engines have taught us that we can search for anything, and that we can search for all the words. And that isn't what a library, museum or archive holds. Mostly what we hold are pictures, or just the metadata record. So this manuscript here is a piece of folk medicine. It's a herring recipe. We have a catalogue record for that, but because it's a handwritten manuscript, we don't have the text transcribed, and therefore you can't search that. That, if you're from a professional background, that may seem like a very obvious statement, but it isn't an obvious statement for most users. Our third problem is lack of context. So we didn't pop into existence believing and knowing what we know. We are a product of our culture. The works that we hold within our collection are also a product of that culture, and knowing the context is important. So, for example, this is a letter from John Moore. John Moore in later life became a Member of Parliament and Lord Mayor of London. But this letter was written in 1664, when at the time he was a London merchant trading in lead. The date doesn't mean anything to you. 1664 was among other things, was the date of the plague in London. In the letter, he writes back to his brother, suggesting that his nephew should return to the countryside, because he's noticed that the number of plague deaths has increased in this month. It's a wonderful item in itself. I don't want to detract from that. But it becomes much more useful if you can put it alongside this piece of work. This is the bills of mortality for the month that letter was written. So this is a record published of all the people that died in London in that month. If you cross-reference those two documents, what you find is that the month that he wrote that letter was the first month that more than 1,000 people died of the plague. You might think that's a pretty horrific number before it got to 1,000, but at the time that was more significant. It was also the moment where the plague jumped from the poor slums of London and into the city. So, he was probably quite an observant man. But the point really is that placing those two documents together makes those two documents more valuable by placing the context around them. As an aside, his nephew probably survived. Looking in another archive, we know that his will included a reference to his nephew with the same name and leaving some of his estate to him. So he's probably okay, or was. He's definitely dead now. So the issue with the digital experience is that we've, in some senses, atomized our collection to the point where, in theory, you can find everything, but you have no idea what you're looking at. I say that you can find everything. That is, in some sense, strictly speaking, true. You can search for things, and that search will return you some stuff. However, it's also true that in the main, it doesn't work very well. So, at Wellcome, we have a click-through rate of about 15%. In other words, of every 100 searches that people try to carry out, most of them are unsuccessful. They don't return something that the user finds useful. Only 15 out of that 100 are useful. So really, this idea that digital catalogues are a searchable interface is theoretically true, but in practice, not true. What is true is that digital catalogues are pretty difficult for most people to understand. The fourth problem that we need to try to tackle is one of access. So how do we make this material available? So part of that is we need to digitize things. We need to take photographs of them. We need to put those photographs online. And we also need to put those photographs online, not just so that they are physically available, but also so that they're licensed in a way that anybody can legally use and reuse that material. But access isn't just the mechanical act of taking photographs and pushing them up online. We also need to make sure that the reading experience is good, is great, in fact. I mean, one thing that you can say about a library, so this is the reading room at Wellcome Collection, is that it is a fantastically designed experience for reading. It's well lit, it's comfortable, it's quiet. And online, we make you read through a letterbox. This is not a good reading experience. This is not a thing that you want to do. So we might technically be making access available to this material, but we're not making it in a way that people feel comfortable and easy to use. And that's before we get to programmatic access. So how do we allow other computers to access that information through APIs? And finally, we want to have new ideas to thrive. This is the final challenge that I'm sort of taking on for myself. So currently, for something to be in a collection, it is deemed to be good enough. That isn't just about the curator, the archivist, the librarian deeming it to be good enough. Before it gets to there, the publisher needs to deem that it's good enough. And that typically means that you need to be, or certainly had to be, relatively rich. You probably were white, you're probably a man, because those are the people that had publishers. That's an incredibly narrow set of ideas and slice of culture that we're trying to represent. And for archives, a little bit different, but probably just need to be famous and dead. So what about all the other ideas? What about all the other people? How do we help represent those ideas and those experiences within the interface? Now, this isn't about designing the digital library. Often, you go to conferences, people talk about digital libraries, they have this idea that the paradigm is the same digitally and physically. I have my catalogue, I search my catalogue, and then I either go and request the item from the shelves, from the stacks, or I go and request the item digitally. That's a very odd way of thinking about it. It's odd, if you think about it, no other website that you deal with would operate in that way. So what we're trying to do is we're trying instead to look at the contextual experience of our users. So what are they trying to do? Who are they? When they're online and at home or in their work environment, or when they come into the library? What are the issues that they're facing? What are the approaches they're taking? How are they thinking about this problem? And what's the right way in which we might therefore be able to design and build a system to help them solve their problems? So this is not just treating digital as a platform unto itself. It's not just the catalogue for the physical library. It is a space which is useful for people whether or not the physical library exists. Although obviously we need to continue to support the needs of physical access. So we want to try to design this platform in a way that helps our users do the things they want to do. I joined Wellcome, well, I guess almost 2 years ago. And when I joined, one of the first things I did, particularly before people knew who I was, I'd sit behind the library desk, sit in the library and listen to what was going on. And listen to the sorts of questions and queries that our our users had when they came into the library. And all too often the librarian would sit there and go, yeah, we've got that, but no, you can't search that way. No, you can't start there. You have to do this. And they would show them the back door through and teach them the magic keywords they needed to use to find the thing that they wanted to do. That in itself should be an indication that something is wrong. If you need somebody to interpret the machine for you to help you use it, the person designing the machine did the wrong thing. But I also know that isn't unique to us. This is a universal problem for libraries, museums and archives. So what we want to do is we want to try to encapsulate the librarian. We want to capture the ideas and the approach that they talk about when they're helping their users, and try to codify that knowledge, that approach, within the software, within the design that we're putting forward. And in doing that, hopefully, the interfaces that we're giving people, the systems that we're giving people, become more intuitive, become easier to understand, because they do what the person expects them to do, rather than having to learn how the system might work. Now, there's an obvious question of how we're going to do that. And at this point, I should own up. I don't have all the answers. What I'm going to present is our approach that we're taking, how we're trying to tackle this problem, the way in which we're trying to uncover and discover the solutions to this problem. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to be able to provide access to all. How do we provide universal access to this material? So librarians historically, or libraries, I beg your pardon, historically, have sought to provide free, as in no charge, access to our collections. But in the internet era, that is a necessary but insufficient step if you really want to provide unlimited access. Because one of the powers of digital technologies, of digital media, is the ability to reuse, recombine and analyse the data in a way not originally envisaged by that author. And to be able to do that, you need to be able to look at the licensing of those images. So you need to be able to do more than just make the material available for no financial gain, but you also need to give people the ability, the legal right, to be able to make changes to that material, so-called open access publishing. We also obviously do, I beg your pardon, there we go. Oh, sorry, there we go. So you also need to provide digital access, both to the catalogue itself and to the digitised material. And where possible, we want to be able to convert those digitised images into text. So there's a way of doing that. Optical character recognition is a piece of technology that looks at the image of a piece of written text and converts it back into words, into numbers, into tables, into things like that, which can then be searched for and can be processed. And then we also need to be able to make sure that the way in which we're making this stuff available is both accessible to people and accessible to machines. So to be accessible to machines, you need to publish an API, publish an interface that machines can connect to. But you also need to, ideally, do that in an open way, in an interoperable way, so that others can do the same thing. So, about 7 years ago, Wellcome embarked on a fairly major program of digitisation. Started off slow, ramped up. We have currently digitised in excess of 31.5 million images, which represents about 200,000 individual items. Sounds like a large number, in some sense it is. No one's sure. It's probably about 5% of the collection. So here is a video of one of the ways in which we digitise manuscripts. So one of the challenges with manuscripts is that you want to keep you want to be able to do it quite quickly, but you also need to be able to keep the image in focus, and you want the image to be the same size, whether it's the first page or the last page. And if you imagine that you fix the camera at a point, and as you move down, as you go through the book, through the manuscript, you're, in effect, the page is getting further and further away from the lens of the camera. And you can keep refocusing, but the trouble is because it's further away, it'll get smaller. So what that setup does is it uses lasers to ensure that the distance from the lens to the distance of the manuscript remains constant. That means it's in focus and all the pictures are the same size. Historically, what we've tried to do is also to digitize images for their informational content. So the text, the pictures held within the page. But we're also wanting to try to capture more than that. We want to try to capture some essence of what the object is like. Now, again, this is sort of some early experiments of how that might work. So here, what we've done is we've experimented with different lighting techniques to try to highlight the embossed gold leaf on the front of this manuscript. Here, the image on the left is the setup that we've used, and we're shining light underneath it to expose the middle and image on the right, which are watermarks embedded within these manuscripts. So these manuscripts, it turns out, the person that created them used inside made the paper, huge diverse range of watermarks. In some cases, every page has a different watermark embedded in there. And then finally, we've tried to do this. So this is back to the fugitive sheet. I'll turn that off. So fugitive sheets are loosely bound or unbound pages that help people understand the anatomy of a person. So they're these multi-layered things that you open up. A picture of them, it's quite difficult to understand that object. So we did a time lapse of that image, and that helps, I think, give a better sense of what this object is about. That particular image was taken to be displayed within one of our gallery exhibitions for one of the current temporary exhibitions on Can Graphic Design Save Your Life? So it's trying to help people understand the mechanics and the way in which this thing was put together. And from a technical perspective, the images that we're making available are made available through a standard called IIIF, which is the International Interoperability Image Framework, which is a bit of a mouthful. The idea behind it is that museums, libraries, archives have a common way of dealing with and transmitting information, sort of cultural knowledge that's bound up in these images. And Wellcome was a founding member of IIIF, and we're sort of quite supportive of it. So if others are doing this sort of thing, I would welcome you to have a look at IIIF and have a look at and try to use it. So that's the content. That's great. What about the software? How do we design this thing in a way that works for people? I'm going to try to design a software that's sort of as smart as a puppy. Puppies aren't that clever, but they're a bit smart. They're helpful, they're not passive. They pay attention to what's going on, and they try to learn as they're going along. Too many library systems are passive and dumb. They don't help you, and they keep making the same mistake. So can we make this system that's a little bit smarter? The first thing that we need to do, if we're trying to do that, is have a common way in which we can model our information. We, and many others, have multiple systems for cataloguing our information. So the library content is catalogued in Mark 21, our archives are catalogued as ISAD-G. These are all just sort of different standards, but they're broadly speaking incompatible. Spectrum is used for museum content. And in addition to all the other problems that you might have to deal with, if you don't deal with this, then before you can engage with any of the material, you first have to understand which catalogue you're dealing with. And that's a real burden. So to give you an idea, this is a traditional approach that many archives follow. This is a hierarchical model. It follows the ISAG situations. The idea is that the bits at the bottom are individual boxes or items, and the bit at the top describes what this collection is. And sort of, in some sense, intellectually that works. The problem with it is that if you're looking at the thing at the bottom, you have to then go back up and look at the thing at the top to understand the context. It also is slightly problematic because bluntly the world is not hierarchical. You know, one thing doesn't live one other place. Now, I'm certainly not the first person to suggest that, and archivists have therefore developed an alternative to that, so this idea of a series model, where you have this top layer, which is a set of so-called authority files, descriptions of what is going on and who are the key characters and the key events that the collection describes. The problem with it is there's sort of no way in. You don't know what the collection is about. And so we're sort of taking a bit of a hybrid approach. So much of our collection is catalogued in this hierarchical model, but what we're doing is we're sort of taking out the key people, the key events, the key activities, and placing those above it so that you've got this multiple route in. This is the scary slide. I shall not stay on this for too long. All I really wanted to do with this is that this is the approach that we're taking for bringing together all of our books, all of our archives, all of our images into one place, and then describing them in the way that actually makes sense to people. Because readers want relevant content first and format second. So they want to be able to say, what have you got on this person? What have you got on this event? What happened at this time? Not, have you got a book? Now tell me what the event was. That's not what people do. So this is our approach to sort of trying to create a unified model whereby we can describe both the range of different catalogues that we hold, but also the ideas, the things that matter to people. Another scary slide. This is an example of how we might deal with that. So this is Michael Ashburner, who is a biologist. He's a professor in the Department of Genetics at University of Cambridge. Is one of the archives that we hold. The collection level description, the text that describes him and his life, is probably the single most useful summary of his work on the web. Most people can't find it because of all these issues. But we can also make it much more powerful, because that description is just plain text. It doesn't link you to anything else, despite the fact that the key entities that are held within that description are really, really important to people. So he had jobs at institutions that sort of people care about. He wrote papers in journals that people care about. He did things that people care about. If we can identify those individual objects and link them together and link them to other parts of the collection, the whole thing becomes much more useful. So this then is our problem. Over here we have lots and lots of different data sources, and in essence we're trying to squash them together into this platform. There's lots of technology goes in there, conforming to that model, trying to extract the information that we want, and then providing a single interface whereby people can access that. If we do that, then hopefully we create information in a way that makes sense to people, and we also make it in a way that is common without having to first decide or guess which collection, which approach we happen to have catalogued our material in. And then we need to pipe in all the images that we've had so that those images are found alongside of and as part of that interface, rather than having this sort of separate disjunct of an interface that we have at the moment. If I was being harsh at this point, I could say that we haven't really solved many of those problems I've set up earlier. You know, yes, we've made the images available, yes, we've made the catalogue probably more useful, but we haven't started to create that smart interface. So how do we start to infuse this model, this information, with the data, the links, the information that makes it more useful? Well, the first thing we need to do is to convert things into text rather than images, because computers can process text much more easily than they can images. And we're doing this. We printed text, we convert into lumps of text that can be searched. We extract the tables that we hold within those reports and documents and convert those into structured information, so comma delimited files. And we highlight the figures and images that are embedded within it so that you can work with those more easily. What about handwriting? Much of what we have are manuscripts. Manuscripts aren't printed, and optical character recognition can't be used on it. But I don't know whether that's true. To be honest, I don't know whether I don't know whether this is true. So, certainly in the West, when we write, our handwriting is very different. But it wasn't always the case. Up until about the 1800s, people's handwriting was very consistent. So this is a letter from Lord Nelson. This was written before he lost his arm, and therefore written with his right hand. Because of that, it's much rarer, it's much more valuable, but it's also incredibly generic. It's not even clear that this was written by him, or whether he dictated it to somebody and simply signed it. And the reason for that is that everybody's writing looked like this. It's really, really difficult. It took a cannonball to make him develop his own hand. So this is a letter that he wrote with his left hand after his injury. And it's very, very distinctive. It's very clearly his writing. It's clearly his writing to the point that you just don't find this type of thing other than through injury for people at that time. Now, it's probably worth mentioning at this point that this is true for a sort of very Anglo-centric view. People in France, in Germany had very distinctive hands as well. For us, that matters less because much of our collection is very Anglo-centric. But given that consistency, can we use machine learning to help us convert, not that, but that, into text, into a text that machines can process? Perhaps. There might be lots and lots of errors in there, but maybe that's okay. Maybe it is good enough, because maybe that will help the archivists in their job to be able to catalogue information better. Maybe it's good enough for search. If it fails to convert a word into a recognisable word, that's okay, because no one's going to search for that unrecognisable word. So maybe okay is good enough in this instance. The next thing we need to do, once we have that text, is to try to extract the entities that we hold within it. Convert those raw strings of characters into uniquely identifiable concepts, into the people, events and things that matter. If we do that, then search becomes much, much more useful. Not only search that a person runs, but also search that a computer runs, in other words, automated recommendations and the like. We need to do that because language isn't precise, and computers, although they're fast, they are dumb. So we need to build up a decent training set and show the computer that, and then hopefully it can start to identify the historical events, people that occur within our collection. But there is no silver bullet to all of this. You can't do one thing and hope it'll work. You have to combine different approaches in trying to solve this problem. Part of what we need to do is to understand the intent behind what the user's doing. That isn't necessarily what they do, it's what they want out of it. They're second guessing what the system wants after all. So how can we do that? Well, the first thing is that we need to pay attention to where they're searching from. if they're searching from within a collection, they're more likely to be looking for information within that collection than the whole of our material. If they're searching within a box or within a book, they're probably more likely to be looking for information within that box or book rather than the whole of the corpus. Likewise with dates. Dates are tricky. They're complicated but not particularly complex. So there's lots and lots and lots of different date systems. There's the Julian, the Gregorian, there's the French Revolutionary calendar, all of which describe dates in different ways. And then there are variants on the same system. So the Quakers developed their own system, which broadly speaking looks like the Gregorian, so the calendar that we use today. But because they believed that days of the week were pagan, they don't use them. So they don't use Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They have first day, second day, third day. And then there are a whole bunch of date modifiers. So, you know, circa 1850, or fuzzy dates like the 19th century, springtime. All of these things you can, both in principle and in practice, get software to do for you. And if you do that, then you can start to present people with the information that they want, not necessarily the information that they search for. And then you need to pay attention to the context in which the word was being used. So language changes over time. It's messy. Geographical names change, their spellings change. Scientific and common names differ. There are synonyms. So as a medical museum, as a medical library, we hold material on that includes the words tuberculosis, consumption and TB. And unless we can conflate those down into being one thing, you will only get tuberculosis if you search for tuberculosis, and not consumption and not TB. So how do we do that? We need to have a thesaurus and a contemporary gazette to be able to do that, but it probably isn't sufficient. We need to be able to sort of triangulate all these different data sources and pay attention to what's going on. So if someone's recently been focused on, say, material that's about genetics, maybe we start to boost queries within that field. So if someone's in genetics and they then search for a John Smith, rather than looking for all John Smiths, we look for John Smiths that are geneticists. That's more likely to give you the results that you want. We should also remember that the catalogues themselves are quite structured, so that we can use that information to help give us advantages. So imagine a letter references John Moore, but which John Moore? There are lots of John Moores. Well, if the catalogue, the authority file, references a John Moore, we've got more confidence that they're probably after that person's archive than any old random John Moore that happens to be referenced. What about image recognition and entity extraction? Again, it's often assumed that it's too difficult, that the services that are available out there at the moment have been trained on modern and contemporary images, primarily to solve problems that we don't have, advertising, bluntly. But again, is that true? Well, we can try. So this is an image from the collection. If you give it to Amazon Web Services, their service is called Recognition, spelt in a slightly strange way. That's what it thinks this picture's about. Very certain it's a person, might be human, probably a brochure, maybe a poster. Might say that's a bit unfair because it's an image from a manuscript and very unlikely to be seen, as for it to have seen it before. So what about a contemporary image? This is the image from that we saw earlier. Arguably this is worse. So, you know, it thinks it's a person, but it's really not a playground. So simply throwing historical data at these services isn't good enough. But maybe if we start to stratify that information by date and subject, we can get better information. If we combine the OCR data with the image recognition data, maybe we can get better confidence in our results. So we know that, you know, babies are people, and that a manuscript featuring demons is probably referring to a demon, not a person. So OK can be good enough. We're not trying to build an oracle. We're trying to build a smart puppy. So while the accuracy may matter if we want to link two bits of data, if we want to show that relationship, it matters less if we're just trying to give a hint to an algorithm that can improve search. How might we improve the context of the information that we're giving? Say, we didn't pop into existence. We are a function of the society in which we grew up in. We've been moulded over time, individually and as a society. Understanding that context, therefore, matters. There are, obviously, lots of different contexts. So, as an example, so this is a catalogue record from the Science Museum. If we have a look, this is the information that the cataloguers has included. It's not wrong, it's just not very interesting. It's factually true. We did a fairly simple hack where we tried to combine what we knew. So we said, well, what are the other objects that Henry Wellcome acquired at the same time? And what else do we know about this material? In this case, this parasol was Florence Nightingale's parasol. So it's not that it's just a piece of costume furniture as originally presented. Instead, we can now link you to information about Florence Nightingale, about statistics, because she was one of the pioneers in statistics, and about the information and about the subjects that matter to her. Likewise, we can start to record how the information was originally used. So this is some artwork that we collected from a museum, the Adamson collection, and rather than just trying to photograph the objects in the studio, we went to Guy's Hospital and photographed them in situ to see how they were used within the hospital setting. This again makes that material more useful because we can see the contextual relationship in which it was originally used. And then we can start to tell stories about those collections. Not descriptions of what we happen to hold or descriptions of what we've just acquired, but stories that are interesting to people, that have a protagonist. It's just that we know that they're true because we have this collection that we can research. And perhaps that is the very definition of curation. You know, if you've got a collection, if you've got a place to show it off, and you have a story to tell, then arguably you are a curator. And arguably online, this is often what curation looks like. But we also want to be able to make those links back and forth between those items. It's no good if you can't find those stories. So when I'm looking at a record about an item, I want to be able to find what people have told me about it, what other people think about it. So can we link you from an item in the collection to the stories, exhibitions and items that exist about it? And can we do more than that? Can we link you to the books and articles and exhibitions that are held elsewhere in the world? So can we create a catalogue that knows that it's been talked about? And finally, returning to this idea of trying to democratise the collection. How do we help those ideas to flourish that don't get written into books and don't exist in catalogues? Again, it's difficult to be precise at this point, but we should be able to help archivists, librarians and researchers record what they discover without having to write it into the catalogue. We should be able to help our users tell us what they know as they're starting to research and use the material. Maybe that's as simple as providing a sort of wiki interface as part of it. Maybe it's about making it easy to suggest updates to the catalogue. Maybe it's about being able to annotate those images. Maybe it's about being able to tell us references to the material that's been published and used elsewhere. Maybe it's about drawing other data in from elsewhere on the web to incorporate into this to make a richer experience. Personally, I think we're very lucky at Wellcome. We've got a world-renowned library and museum specialising in the study of medical history. But we're also much luckier than that because of the way in which the subject is explored within our collections. From life and death to everything in between. Charms, magic, contagion, demons, folklore, sexuality, monsters and the apocalypse. From the public programmes that we put on in the public spaces to our digital archives, we've done a lot to try to make our collections accessible and inspire our users to think differently. This really is the next step on that path, on that journey, to transform the collection, the practices and the culture and the strategies that we have to take advantage of those digital technologies. And in doing so, we'll continue to be open and learn about what we do and what others do so that we can learn from them and others can learn from us. It's indeed why I'm here today. If we can be successful, then more people can use our collections. A greater diversity of people can use those collections. And if we can do that, maybe we'll have more ideas, better ideas, more diverse ideas, and ultimately, hopefully, an improvement in human health. Thank you very much.